This is API Case Files.
Hear this message. Tune this channel. Like E.T. said, phone home.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of API Case Files. I am your host, Marsha Barnhart. API Case Files provides an opportunity to examine and discuss reports and observations of unidentified aerial phenomena and the associated interests surrounding the study of that phenomena. During this episode, API Director Paul Carr, lead investigator Savannah Dollison, and I discuss several of our latest investigations in depth. I cover two of my cases, 18010, which was a close encounter case that occurred May 1st, 2018. This sighting was in New Jersey, about 10 miles north of Trenton. And case 18013, which took place near Troy, New York on June 5th and June 9th, 2018. Paul talks about his recently closed case 18-009. This was a close encounter case witnessed by a husband and wife the evening of August 12th, 2017, in the state of Utah near the entrance of Butterfield Canyon, about 40 miles south-southwest of Salt Lake City. Savannah outlined her ongoing case, 18-003, set in the northeastern portion of Georgia. This report was filed with API in late January 2018. Also on this podcast, Paul Carr presents episode 10 of his Unidentified Science series. The case discussion you are about to hear was recorded on June 18, 2018.
Marsha, why don't we just go right into you talking about your case?
I'm just about finished with my case of 18-010. Now, this was set in New Jersey, and it was a man who had walked out of his home. Then he can easily walk down the street to his local Stop and Shop. So this is around 10 p.m. He walks out, and as per usual, he kind of on his stroll looks around up in the sky, and it was clear skies. And as he was strolling along not far from his home, he saw an unusual light in the sky, which captured his attention. And as he watched that light, it seemed to grow bigger and then come closer. Now, once it got quite close to him, he seemed to lose his orientation.
That's where it kind of goes a little blank for me. There might have been a little bit of a time gap. I'm not sure. Then this thing was behind me. Then I saw this ring coming towards me through my peripheral vision.
And he found himself kind of turned around. And when he regained his orientation, which he figures was only just a few seconds, he noticed a light that was near him, just within some bushes or trees. So he parts these trees and he looks in and he sees this sphere.
Came towards the ground and it started dipping away from me. So the top of it was facing the other direction. Then it turned to the right. And at this point, it was very close to the ground. So it was like probably not even 10 feet. And then it just separated. First, I saw it in the sky, around, and then when I was facing left, it kind of came overhead and came closer to the ground. And then as it was coming closer to the ground, the lights turned from white, a very faint white, and then it got much more intense. And then when it got more intense, then it turned colors to a double ring, like two rings together. I don't know if they were physically attached, but there were two rings One was green, one was red. And then it kind of like leveled out. And then one proceeded at a much faster pace. That one was like way away. Then there was another one that was much closer to the ground, and that one was kind of like almost like examining the ground. It was like very close to the ground, and then it was just kind of like hovering and like it was paying attention to this one particular area.
And so it's kind of hanging out in the grass there, and this other light is about maybe 4 feet off the ground, where this other one is about 2 feet off the ground. And the one that's sniffing around the lawn gets a little farther ahead of the other one, which commences to catch up. And then the things just float right up and over a school right near where this takes place. This is right in his neighborhood. So they just float off. And he was pretty dumbfounded by that. He said he didn't feel any fear. It was just awe at seeing this operate in front of him. He had no idea what it was. He doesn't feel he lost time, although he says there's probably about 10 steps. He's made this walk many times because it's his local grocery store, walking out of his apartment building. He figures he lost about 10 steps, which isn't much. That might be where he got disoriented. But he walks into the Stop and Shop and does his shopping per normal. And I said, well, did you happen to say to anybody there, geez, did you guys see a strange light outside just now? He never said anything about it. But that's not uncommon. And he walks back into his house and he makes copious notes about the occurrence that just took place. And he, as faithfully as he could, rendered a couple of drawings of what this object was that he saw, trying to make sense of how it could be so big and so small and how it could separate. And he just really couldn't wrap his mind around exactly what he'd seen. I asked him any communication. He said no, but that he sent a mental communication kind of along the lines of, what are you doing here? What's this about? But he got nothing. He said he heard something when these two rings of light separated. And he said it was akin to kind of the sound like when on Star Trek, when you're getting in that transporter. A little bit of a sound kind of like that, but there was no way. I asked him to imitate it. He simply could not. But that's the closest he could go with it.
Another thing, I don't understand this, but after the incident was over, like the next day, I was like really angry. I'm not really sure why, but it was an experience I never expected to see.
So I, doing my due diligence, I call that police department there and ask if there was any reports that night of any unusual lights. The very hairy desk sergeant checks and says, no, we got nothing. There were no reports. I called the Stop and Shop market and happened to talk to the man who was there that night. And he says, this was a couple weeks after this incident. He says, I've heard nothing. No one's mentioned it. I didn't see anything. So I can't tell you anything because nobody coming and going has mentioned that. And so that's where we are with that story. No corroboration. It is fantastical, but not outside the realm of other things that have been reported with UFO anomalous activity. So I'm at this point, I can't explain what it is, but it doesn't sound like anything prosaic. And so I'll probably close it as unidentified.
That's a really good witness who goes and writes everything down right after the experience and makes sketches and so forth.
I mean, can you imagine seeing that? There are instances where normal human beings walk into a Twilight Zone episode, and this guy did. So anyway, that's going to be closed unidentified, I'm pretty sure. Now, I just got another case from New York. There's a lot of New York cases. And this was a man who was out walking his dog, and twice at around 1:10 in the morning, about 5 days apart, this man has seen an unusual object in the sky. And he filed a report with us the second time he saw it, 9 June. But the first time he saw this unusual object, he filed a Newport report, 5 June.
So I had woken up to take my dog out. It was about maybe 1 o'clock or so, at night. And so I was out there letting him do his business. The weather was fairly clear with some, random light puffy clouds. And I was looking at the stars, as I always do. And I happened to look west. And as I'm looking, I see 4 or 5 very sharp and bright flashes. The flashes were very intense and pinpointed, but very clustered. Flashed, and then flashed, and then flashed, and then flashed. And then they were very bright and intense. It was in the same place in the sky, and it was almost like flash bulbs, like the old rotary cube flash bulbs that you used to have on cameras. Very intense and kind of clustered, but not in the same spot. The flashes did not move. They were in the same kind of general area, but it was like a pattern, like if you a shotgun with pellets, and it's like just random, but they were very intense flashes, and they just like flash, 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 and they were super bright, and they were like pinpointed, but they occupied, I would say, if you held up your thumb, maybe slightly larger than your thumbnail in the same area. They were not aircraft moving, like, you see your regular strobes and anti-collision lights and stuff. And they didn't have any streaks or tails like meteors or that you would see like objects like that. And they weren't like a single pinpoint moving across the field of the sky as you would like a satellite. It was just very intense. I was in the Army for 10 years, so I'm particularly familiar with like recognizing aerial vehicles and stuff like that just from my Army occupation. And so I thought, wow, that was very startling enough to make the Newport the report. And so that kind of like, whoa, that's kind of interesting. And then later on that Friday that evening, I was outside and just looking at the stars, and I was almost finished. It was about 1:10. And that's when I saw the object for the second report. I was getting ready to head back in when I looked up, and to the left, right where there's a tree, bunch of trees, there's a very intense, maybe about the size of a nickel. It was an orb. It was very, very, very intense. What set it apart was that it was pulsating. It was pulsating instead of like flashing like a light, and it was moving from west to east, and it was pulsating, and the light pulse was like a slow increase. It would hold for about a second to a half, and then it would slowly decrease, maybe a slight 2-second pause, and then it would slowly increase. It never fully went out. It would like increase, it would decrease, and then the decrease, it was still there, and then 2 or 3 seconds, and it would slowly increase. It went straight from left to right in my field of view. It was so amazing. It just went across. It slowly increased, decreased, and it was just pulsating. And as it's going across, I'm standing there really like, wow, this is spectacular. It was like totally quiet. There was no rotor noise. There was no engine noise. There was no like a drone, like the high-pitched whine of a drone. It just floated across my field of vision from left to right. And as it was doing so, it was pulsating. And I stood there transfixed, and I had some binoculars with me. And towards the last couple seconds, I brought them up, and I looked through my binoculars, and I was what I saw was very different from the actual, floating across the sky. when I looked through the eyepieces of my binoculars at the object, I was expecting like an intense bright white light. But what I actually saw was a field, I guess, the best way, or an aura or a haze of an electric blue color. It was like this really intense neon electric blue, like a field. And then within the middle of this, the field, there was this object that was like a rectangular shape. I would say just like a rock. It was like moving and tumbling kind of in a random pattern. There was no wings, no engines, no propulsion of any type, no windows, access points or anything like that. And the rectangular shape was covered in these triangular shaped facets that reflected the bluish light from the field itself.
He brought his binoculars down to gather himself, looked back up, and it was gone. It had disappeared, probably behind the trees.
It really was one of the most bizarre things I have ever seen.
He sent a drawing of the orientation he was looking at, and then an inset of this multifaceted, tumbling kind of rock-like thing that he witnessed through his binoculars.
Okay.
I'm really excited to hear how that one shakes out, because he gave such a detailed report and a really great sketch. I thought that it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a lot of information to work with. He seems like a really valuable witness.
Yeah.
When I first started looking at this report, I naturally looked to New Fork, and I saw there were 2 reports from his town. And I asked if he didn't make that report, then somebody else saw something similar to his. And he said that was his original report on 5 June. And that's why he was out on 9 June trying to see if he could see that again. And when I took a look at that first report, the witness then, the same guy, says he saw blinking lights that were about 65 degrees in the sky to the southwest of him. When I looked on the map, southwest of that town, there is a arsenal there, an army arsenal there. And I'm going to look into that because
well, they don't have a test facility. It looks like you just look at the aerial view. There's buildings and parking lots. There's no range. So
at any rate, that's piqued my curiosity, that being so close. And so I'll probably take a look at that and contact them, because I want to know what might be going on there, if anything. I still have a lot of research and investigation to go on. Okay.
The only one I'm really going to go into depth on in this episode is 18009. We have, by the way, closed out written reports on lots of other cases, but they're older cases. I discovered that case 12-058, which is an old case that we worked, one of the first cases we worked, had not been closed properly and had not been, the ROI had never been finished. So I did that. And so now we have that one closed out. And that's available, a redacted version of it that is with no personal identifying information for the witness is available on our website. And we'll have links to all that on the show notes. The most recent case that I'm preparing to close it, we're getting close to it now, is 18009, which is a case in Utah. The witnesses believe that the object came quite close to them, although it was straight overhead. And as we know, that estimates of altitude and distance for unfamiliar objects are highly unreliable. So I asked them if the object illuminated the ground or the area around them, and at least one of the witnesses was quite sure it had not done so. In this case, this couple were out in Utah, a little bit southwest of Salt Lake City, in a canyon, or at least near the entrance to a canyon called Butterfield Canyon, and they had parked their car to watch the Perseid meteor shower. This was in August of 2017, as they were just enjoying the night sky, and they had some binoculars, and they were hoping to see some meteors. They noticed a bright light coming in directly from the west, which is over some hills and mountains to the west. They noticed it after it already had risen above the hill, and it got closer and closer until it was right over them. They perceived that it was hovering for a short time over them, and then it moved on to the east and did not, just continued on to the east. There was nothing particularly strange about its flight except that this perceived hovering. However, it seemed to them extremely large and had a bluish glow to it. One of the witnesses was trying to see it in binoculars, but it became so large that the binoculars, it filled more than the field of view of the binoculars. So he put down his binoculars, and now typically binoculars have a field of view of about 5 to 7 degrees. So that's a tenth of the distance. So however far it was, and he estimated less than 300 yards, the other witness estimated less than 100 feet. So there's a discrepancy there, but that's because there's a trade-off size and distance. The bigger it seems, you may tend to think is closer, but since it's an object you can't identify, you don't know how big it is, so you may think it may actually be further away and even larger. She estimated size of a school bus, 100 feet away, which would be about consistent with that bigger than 7 degrees size. So the two witnesses were roughly consistent in their angular size estimates, but they each perceived a different distance, almost a factor of 10 different. But that's okay, because we don't expect them to be able to estimate the distance properly, or the altitude. It might have been much, much higher up, but if it was really, really huge. So while we don't know the altitude, we don't know the size, we can sort of figure out how they relate to each other. And so if it was, say, 1,000 feet away, it would have been about 100 feet long, or possibly longer. So quite large, bluish, what they called a muted bluish light, even though as it was approaching, it was very bright. Now, there were reported feelings of trepidation, and they actually, after staying at the site for a while, they decided to leave because they were feeling fearful. They had their child with them as well, so they decided to leave the site. I have not been able to find any other any corroboration yet. However, I haven't checked everything, so there's a couple more things that need to be checked, like the historical flight records, and maybe some local law enforcement or park rangers, since that area has quite a few state and national parks. Although the area that they were at was just a little bit southeast of a big copper mine, which I don't think is in use at night. I think they do their mining during the day. So we'll know more soon, but I think we're going to close that one out as unidentified. Interesting case. Now, it does turn out that within a day of that case, there was a black triangle sighting in that same general area. However, there's no way to tell if they're related. So that's just a point of interest right now. Don't have anything to connect the two.
Something I found interesting in this case, Paul, was that the lady felt this kind of pressure / watched feeling which freaked them out and which made them leave. That's been reported before too, that you can't see something, but you feel something is watching you. But this pressure that she'd mentioned, something pressing down on them, I find that interesting. Was it a mental type of thing, or was there something in the air that literally changed air pressure or something? That's curious to me.
Yeah, it's no way to tell. My first guess would be it's a psychological effect, but there's no way to just to distinguish them at this point. Yeah, there was definitely a residual feeling, and they were happy to get out of there and head home. Even though the best time to see meteors is actually after midnight, they didn't stay around to that time. The witnesses have been very cooperative and have answered all our questions, and I think but we just don't have much more we can go on. I'll try a couple more avenues of approach, but I think we're basically out of information on that one. If somebody else had seen it, that would have been awesome. My understanding was that other people do go into that canyon to do things like look at meteor showers, but no one else has reported this. To some people not paying much attention, it might have just seemed like an aircraft flying over. But this was silent, and they think it was quite close. So it doesn't appear to be a conventional aircraft. Certainly the lighting is not consistent with that. We'll keep digging, but I think we're going to close that one soon as unidentified.
Especially that it was cigar shaped and it zipped off and disappeared. So
they said the shape was a little bit indistinct. They think it might have been an oval shape, yeah. Not so much cigar, but it was sort of bathed in light, and they really couldn't. And we never got a sketch from them because I think they just didn't know how to draw it.
Well, she said it looked like a bus in the sky.
Well, she said it was the size of a bus, roughly the size of a school bus, based upon her estimate that it was 100 feet away. It might have been actually much larger. Let's go on to Savannah's case then.
I am going to review case 18-003. The time of the incident was January 21st this year, and it's a couple different sightings over a few days, but the time frames are between midnight and 4 a.m., and that's Eastern time. Somebody sent us a report that says early in the morning, this witness works like a swing shift, right? So if he goes to work at 5 p.m. on a Friday, he gets off work at 2 a.m. on Saturday morning. So when we're talking early on Saturday morning, we're talking like 2 a.m., right? The witness comes home and he sees an object in the sky. He sees it moving right and left to right based on his movements. The witness spends a little bit of time sitting outside after work watching this object outside his house. He says it moves more when he's actually walking around. When he sits still, it's only moving a small amount. And then he goes inside and, asks his mom and his sister to come outside and look. They see the object too, and they also see that it's, moving back and forth a little bit. Although I haven't been able to corroborate that with the other two witnesses, like his mom and his sister. Although I asked for that information. The witness did have a friend over during one of the sightings, and that second witness I was able to interview on the phone as well. There's sort of some interesting things I would call them some speculation, some rumors going around in this city in Georgia, where when the witnesses talk to their friends and neighbors about this sighting, the people around the town say, oh, well, this is surveillance drones, and we think it's drug related, and we think that there's a lot of them, like maybe even hundreds of these drones in the area looking out for drug activity. So I did contact the local police department and asked them, hey, do you guys use any drones? Do you have anything like that up in the sky? And their answer was no. And honestly, when I first heard about the case, my gut reaction was this is another case of stellar scintillation, right? When somebody sees a pinprick of light against a dark background and it appears to move back and forth, to shake back and forth a little bit, to change colors and shape a little bit. But what's really happening is that the light, like for instance from a star, is passing through our atmosphere, and it gets shaken up and kicked around and refracted through our atmosphere. By the time it gets to our eyes, it really looks like it's moving and changing colors. This especially happens when it's against a black object. Our eyes don't have anything to compare it to. So when we move, we think it moves. The longer we look at that object, the more it seems to move. And then also the psychological component of it, where if one person looks at this object and says, hey, I think that that's moving, then the people around them are far more likely to also say, yeah, you're right, that is moving. Which I think is what could be happening with this witness's friends and family looking at the object. I did do some research into drones and how they work, because the witness says that he sees these objects in the sky for hours at a time. Like they're always out there. So I'm looking into drones, and here's why I don't believe it's drones. For one thing is battery life. So the witness says these objects are out at night for hours. And even a professional drone really only has a flight time of 20 to 30 minutes. And then like a civilian drone or just an amateur drone, someone just hanging out, taking pictures and making videos, is really only 10 to 15 minutes. And then the witness and the people around town sort of get the idea, right, if these are surveillance drones, that they have cameras on them, other scanning devices, that adds weight to a drone, which makes it even less of a flight time. There's a drone, there's like a series of drones under the name Mavic Pro, and those on their website are like really excited about their drones that can last 25 minutes, and they're just like over the moon excited about it. So these are like top of the line drones that people can buy, and we're still talking just 25 minutes. And then if we're talking military drones, maybe one of those can fly like 32 hours, right? But those cost about $16.9 million. And the cheapest, if we can use the word cheapest, military drone is about $40,000, but only flies for 25 minutes. You know, it's very unlikely that this local police department is flying $16 million drones, or, you know, if they are, they probably don't have more than one of them. Like the witness and the townspeople believe there's maybe hundreds of them. I think it's more like the witness and people in town are just, I think he's, you know, paraphrasing or maybe exaggerating the conversations. Like, oh yeah, I've seen him too. You know, that kind of talk. I can't be sure though. I wasn't able to speak with any other townspeople. So when I spoke to the second witness, our original witness's friend, you know, he said, yeah, I saw it in the sky, and yeah, it seemed to move around here and there. But he didn't mention seeing them at another time outside of his friend's house. You know, they live in the same city.
Have you contacted the local newspaper, Savannah, to see if there's been any reports or chit chat or gossip about anything like that?
Let me check my the steps I made, my investigation activity. No, I didn't contact the newspaper. I did contact like a local community college that had an aerospace tech program. And I did contact the airport. And I talked to a man there. I said, hey, are you guys getting any UFO reports? from anyone in the area. They're the local, just like small kind of not like a commercial flight airport. And he said they haven't heard
Community
anything like
airport.
that. Yes, they haven't had any reports. He said the only thing that they hear about is really people call and complain about crop dusting planes flying too low over their houses. The noise is bothersome. They're worried about their yards getting covered in any of whatever they're spraying. So he does hear from the community, but he's never heard about a UFO, like anything that people can't just identify.
Often when you hear a witness talk about lights in the sky that are there for hours and over every night or whatever, it's usually something stellar. It's a stellar object. Don't you think, Paul?
Yes, I would say that's a very high probability. If they're seeing it every night or every clear night in particular, and they see it the same place in the sky, it's almost certainly something astronomical.
Exactly. And I asked the witness, because I can't be there in person. This witness was far away from me. I asked them, can you pull up, download this sky map application on your smartphone and point it at the sky. Tell me what you see. And he did that. And what his email reply was, yeah, so I used that sky map app, and there were so many stars in the sky, it complicated things and I couldn't tell what was what. So to me, that says, yeah, there were a lot of stars in the sky. And when I looked at the sky map on my computer for the date and time and the direction he was looking in, I think it's very likely that he was seeing a star called Beta Aquilae, the Beta Aquilae star, and the Altair star, which is actually the same star that I think was a part of my Oregon case of stellar scintillation. These are very, very, very bright stars.
Yeah, Altair is in the summer triangle. Starting in the spring, you'll see it.
Yeah, when
trying to
these
think
lights
here.
are
Also-
not doing, zip, 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 if they aren't doing that, they're probably stellar objects.
Right. He also sent a picture, which really, is grainy, and I couldn't really see what was going on. And I asked him, what camera did you take this photo on? What were you using? And da-da-da. And what he said was, I sent you a photo that I put through some kind of editing software to enhance this or enhance that. And so I said, well, I really need the original. That's what I need to see. And I never did get that. He did send me a series of videos that took place over one night that were sequential. And through zooming in, he's really zooming in. He put like an add-on to his phone. You can physically put another lens on the outside of a smartphone to add some zoom or add this or add that to it. So he's zooming through this lens also. It's really distorting, I imagine, what he was seeing. And that's part of it too, is when I look through my camera, when I'm looking through my camera, you can really see it change shape and change color. That's another big indicator to me
that's just his camera lens trying to do what it can't do. It cannot focus on infinity, on a bright light in the night. It cannot do it. So it blooms and it turns into the typical, what they call diamond shape. That lens is showing us nothing but a perversion of what it's looking at. So yeah, you're right. That's worthless. But you can't, it's hard to tell people that they aren't seeing a diamond shaped UFO. They're seeing a camera that is incapable of capturing that light properly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I have a camera with a very good autofocus, but at night on a light in the sky, I will use manual focus because I know that's going to pull it in.
Yes.
And it doesn't go out of focus that way.
Yep. So I have a question here, Savannah, about what elevation is he seeing these stars at?
I know for sure. So he's seeing a few different of these objects, right? A few different lights in the night sky, and I know for sure that one of them is just over like the rooftop of a nearby barn. So not a very
Okay.
high angle. And that's another that's another indicator of stellar scintillation, because the lower it is in the horizon line, it's moving diagonally through our atmosphere, that light, instead of straight down if it's right up above your head. It has to travel through even more of our atmosphere. It gets moved around even more than it normally would have.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen stars, they'll change from red to green, when they're close to the horizon. And it's quite pretty, but we know what that is.
Exactly. And it's kind of
Geez,
like
Savannah.
once you can see it everywhere. So I'd encourage any listeners to download a sky map app on your phone. Go outside on a clear night and look at something, look for something for sure is a constellation. Look for the Big Dipper, look for the North Star. Find it through your phone, right? So it identifies it for you. So you're looking at it, you know what it is, your phone's looking at it, your phone knows what it is, and then watch it. Wait for that experience of stellar scintillation. See if the longer you look at it, the more it kind of moves and shakes around. See if you see it change color. Get used to what that looks like. Then you can identify it when you don't have your sky map app open and you don't know what constellation it is.
And especially those that are closest to the horizon, they're going to have the stellar scintillation most prominent. You kind of become the stellar scintillation queen, Savannah.
That's my thing. Send them on out. That's why I think I have a new case open right now that I won't go into too much detail because I have not spoken directly to the witness. I'm only looking at the report they've sent in through our website. But I'll tell you, it sounds very similar. An object in the sky, changing color a little bit from like blue to white to blue. And then same thing, they have a camera and they say, well, to the naked eye, it just looks like a star. But man, if I zoom in on my camera, it's changing shape, it's changing color and all that stuff. So yeah, send them my way, Marsha. I'll knock them out. Those stellar scintillation cases. I got my sky map out.
Okay.
Stellar scintillation specialist. So
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, well, that sounds pretty good.
Well, we'll give you one case someday that's a little bit more intriguing than that.
Back to you, Paul.
That's all my cases, but for now, one thing I did want to point out is that we do have an investigations page that has been rebooted, and starting with 2018, we're going to try to get all the cases listed on that page, and that page the list reports of investigation that have been cleaned of any personal identifying information. They're what we call redacted. So the witness's name and email and address and so on will not be in those reports. It'll just say redacted. But everything else, all the information that doesn't identify the witness will still be in the report, including conclusions and investigative steps and so forth. So if you're interested in the case, you really want to take a deep dive, you can read those ROIs. And we're going to have all of them up there. And we have a few of the older ones that have put up just a small number. We have actually a lot of them, but they haven't been redacted. So that work has to be done before we get them up there. I don't think we're going to be doing that very fast. So probably over the next year or so, we'll get all the 2018 cases and 2019 cases will be on there. And I'd encourage people to go look at that. And now Marsha's also been doing video case summaries on our video channel, and these are very brief. They're typically a minute or so in duration, and they give you a quick visual overview of some of the cases that we've worked. So I'd encourage you to go look at that. Won't take you long at all. And we are trying to get more information about the cases out to the public, and we would love to hear your feedback or ideas on what we missed, what we could have done better, and that will be very valuable to us. There's a link to it on the main site. It just says YouTube channel, or underneath the podcast on the podcast tab. And then there's also a link there straight to the YouTube channel. The 150011 has had over 100 views. So we're starting to get a little bit of traction. I think people are not going to be, frankly, as intrigued with the ones where it turned out to be a meteor or a balloon or a satellite. But we need to put those up there too.
It's super educational. I mean, we're not in the game of spreading misinformation or clickbait. So if people really want to learn about UFOs, they'll appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, also it makes the point that most of our cases are identified, eventually. Now, the 15001 is a weird one. I look at that video and I look at it and I still don't have any idea what that is. It's one of the better videos I've seen, actually. That's the Washington State case where he had a video and the guy saying, "What is this?" It's real. I mean, you can tell from his voice that he's really.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, and I can't make any sense of it.
I've seen a lot of that on other videos and reports. That's kind of orby,
floating around.
Something.
At first, I thought it was something biological, but I can't figure out what it would be. It's not fireflies and it's not birds. I don't know what it is, but it has that sort of biological feeling to it. It's something swarming. It's not dust orbs. I don't know what it is. I mean, I've seen lots of dust orbs, but those are still photographs where the flash fires and you get the dust that's out of focus that's, close to the camera.
Part of me wanted to think that it was some type of,
plasma?
Plasma. But plasma doesn't last that long. It's just instantaneous. It doesn't.
The Hestelon lights can sometimes last that long. I'm thinking it may be related to the Hestelon lights, which are real interesting. We have a semi-repeatable phenomenon up in Norway. And they've done there have actually been academics that have gone up there and have taken instrumented measurements of these things. But this looks like more of them than you ever see at Hestelon. You see one or two at a time. This is a whole bunch of them. So I don't know.
This was like a flock.
Yeah.
Flock of strange things in the air that were playing in the cloud cover.
Yeah, and the guy gets out. I guess he gets out of his car, and he sees it. And it's not a camera artifact. He's actually seeing it. And then he takes a video. The video's not great, but you could definitely see them moving around. It's interesting. Yeah. So people are going to want to see that video, and of course they'll look at the other ones too, but just out of curiosity.
This is API Case Files.
Next up, Unidentified Science. What constitutes proof? What do photos and videos of purported unidentified objects add to the tangibility of evidence within the UFO research field and within the field of science itself? Truth, evidence, proof, they're not interchangeable. There is a defined difference between proof and evidence and truth. As Paul illustrates, proof is and probably will remain elusive. But evidence is what we seek. Here's Paul Carr.
There are two things we hear a lot about photographs and videos of UFOs. One, it is so easy to fake a photo or video now that they can't serve as proof of anything. And two, if UFOs are real, why aren't there more compelling, bulletproof photos and videos? It would seem that these two questions are at odds, and to some extent I think they are. However, let me just deal with the first one now. Are photos and videos useless? Let's start with a distinction I think I have made before on this podcast, but needs to be reasserted from time to time. That is, there is an important difference between proof and evidence. I'm not splitting hairs here. Proof is something we basically never get in the real world. In the abstract realms of mathematics and logic, we can prove a proposition. And if you've ever taken an abstract mathematics course, you know that proofs can be very hard to come by. Outside of mathematics, proof is basically not available, nor is it necessary or even desirable. Some doubt, some willingness to question is healthy. So, we should never look to a photo or video as proof of anything. What we do ask for is evidence, and the more the merrier. As Christopher Hitchens once said, what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. If you have more than one line of evidence, that is far more convincing than just one. And if you have multiple lines of evidence that all converge on the same consistent set of ideas without serious contradiction, then we can, in time, reach a level that we call truth. Let me take the liberty of defining truth operationally as some assertion, or better yet, a system of consistent assertions about the world that you can act upon and think in terms of with confidence. We tend to take our truths for granted, but they require generations of careful, hard work and emerge from many years of bitter controversy. It is also the case that some truths may one day have to make way for stronger, more powerful truths. But let's not throw the word evidence around too carelessly. A video or photo isn't evidence unless we specify meaningfully what we think it is evidence of. Actually, without a hypothesis in play, they are just a collection of numbers. Is a photo or video evidence that Earth is being visited by non-human intelligences? I think that's probably just a bit too ambitious, to be honest. In Unidentified Science number 2, I spoke about the problem with the ET hypothesis, which boils down to the realization that there isn't one. Even if you have a good ET hypothesis, it's possible to claim that any artifact is evidence for it. You have to be able to show with near certainty that the evidence in question cannot possibly be faked or mistaken for something else. And that is just too much to ask. Experts tell us that they can, given the time and effort, create an undetectable fake. I'm a little skeptical of this claim, but know of no reason why, in principle, it is impossible. However, note that this means that just because it could be faked doesn't mean that it is, since anything in principle could be faked. So, let's go for a less ambitious hypothesis. That the photo or video is evidence that what the witnesses remember they saw was real. What we mean by that is our assessment of the probability, our degree of belief that the witness saw something real increases at least a little. It is one line of evidence. However, before I am going to let a photo or video nudge my assessment of the case to a higher level of probability, I have to impose some standards that help us to keep error and deception at bay. These simple but surprisingly rare conditions are not by themselves sufficient, but they are necessary. 1. A complete chain of custody. We need to know who took the image, the camera used, and that we have the image file straight from the camera. If the camera has an SD card, it will ideally be removed, placed in a labeled container, and locked up. There is some processing that goes on inside the camera, unavoidably, but the original image with no processing should be preserved. 2. We should know everything we can about the camera itself, the time and date, and the camera settings when the image was taken. This is typically preserved in image metadata, and all the metadata in the image file should be intact, unmodified. Before publishing the report, we can redact any metadata private to the witness. For example, GPS coordinates of the witness residence will be obfuscated. 3. We need to interview with the photographer as well as any other witnesses. We have talked before about the importance of the witness interview, and we regard it as very important to the entire case. There may be some rare exceptions, but we need as close to a face-to-face meeting with the witness as we can get, and possibly more than once. Even when all this is properly squared away, it still doesn't always work out. Sometimes there's just not enough information in the images to tell them apart from images of ordinary objects such as planets, birds, or balloons. There are also imaging artifacts like lens flares, very common, sensor contamination, or dust orbs. Some images are too overexposed or too out of focus to help. Other times, videos will contain no reference objects so that the movement can't be determined. In many sightings, it's primarily the movement that's strange. Other times, it's best to keep your camera in your pocket and use binoculars instead. You might very well realize that something that looked odd to you is actually pretty ordinary. This has happened to me on more than one occasion. When it does work out though, even when the image is aesthetically poor, it can serve as that all-important second line of evidence that can bump up the probability of a report. So, no, photos and videos are not useless, but they're also not all we need. As for the second question, why there are so few good, authentic videos and photos, I think we need more research. We're going to start asking people who didn't get a photo what they remember about that. Where was your camera? Did you get it out to take a photo, etc.? When we have some data, I'll get back to you, but anecdotally, it seems most witnesses simply don't think to take a photo, or they think that conditions are too poor for it. Why that seems to be the case requires a deeper look. We have some detailed advice for how you can improve the chances of getting a good image or video in the event you see something weird in the sky. These things will take some time to go over, so we will save it for a future video on our YouTube channel. I hope you'll subscribe to that channel. Link in the show notes as always.
This brings us to the end of episode 13 of API Case Files. I've been your host, Marsha Barnhart, and I was joined by my colleagues, API Director Paul Carr and Lead Investigator Savannah Dollison. This podcast is a production of Aerial Phenomenon Investigations. Links in the show notes for this episode can be found at apicasefiles.com. The spoken content of API Case Files is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 4.0 license. All music heard on this podcast is licensed under Creative Commons. This free use with attribution music is deeply appreciated, and we thank the musicians and songwriters for sharing their creative spirit. Featured during this episode was music by Ergo Fizmiz, The Gagarin Project, Suruaya, and Broke for Free. The theme music for Unidentified Science is by All India Radio. Our intro theme music is a mashup of Alien Chronicler and Boxcat games, and DJ Spooky provides our outro theme music. Visit our website at aerialphenomenon.org. Here you can find out more about our organization, and you can make a UFO report at this site. Just fill out the form provided as completely as you can, and that will generate a report. If you'd like to drop us a line, that would be great. Email director@aerial-phenomenon.org. Meanwhile, thanks for joining us, and we hope you recommend API Case Files and API Conversations to your friends and acquaintances.
This is API Case Files.